Last week, the top two lost and three of the bottom four won. What's been an interesting few weeks in the League of Ireland as the summer break comes into view. I'm joined by Daniel McDonnell to look ahead to the first of another bank holiday doubleheader. And Dan, we'll start with Shamrock Rovers against Dundalk, who both suffered late frustration last week. Who do you see is in the better position to bounce back?
God, yeah. I mean, it's a strange one, really. I mean, Rovers are down four bodies with suspension, like the three players sent off in a sort of a fraught night in Cork under a number of headings. And Neil Ferrugia also out. And yet it still feels like they might still be in a better place to bounce back than Dundalk, who had a pretty dispiriting defeat against Pats. The only thing I would say is that Dundalk have a lot of players coming back from injury, some of their better players. And if they can, add some experience or some energy in certain positions, particularly in midfield, I'd give them a chance still in this game. But it is a weird one with the Rovers squad that they can be down four bodies and still, and they're still in a position to put out a team full of league winners. I do think like Richie Towell is a loss. Perugia is obviously a loss. Last year the Dock had a very high line in Tala. Rovers exposed them. But I think, okay, so Tell doesn't play. And they have Burke and Gaffney. I mean, like it's a top class sort of option, and Jack Byrne. So I saw Pats against them. They sort of sometimes when Rovers go with that setup, they try and sort of teams try and sort of press them a bit high and peg them back. And if Burke and Byrne go wandering, I think they like Towell can break in behind. They like
Mm.
that Johnny Kenny is an option in behind. We spoke about that. And sometimes with some of the players that might be on the pitch tomorrow, they're very effective, but they're like 30 and 40 yards from goal. And that's possibly part of what teams going there would be looking at. The problem is that the Dock have conceded a lot of goals. They're not a particularly strong defensive side at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like a couple of the recent TV games have been dull enough affairs. This one has the ingredients, I think, to be a lot more attacking. And I would hope that's the case.
Yeah, I think obviously even you can't really say leaving aside what went on off the pitch last week. Obviously, it was a major talking point what happened. But on the pitch, where Stephen Bradley referred to referees and having three players sent off, could be the sort of thing that galvanised. I mean, they've had two very, which you might say, sloppy defeats that you wouldn't have expected them to have, and a game against Dundalk with the fans up for it is the sort of thing that could, not saying spark a season. They're obviously flying very high, but it's just a little siege mentality moment almost.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, look, I mean, I know Stephen Bradley has spoken about the games and he feels, against Draw that they were excellent in everywhere apart from the both boxes. But I think, he's also spoken about they've conceded a lot of goals at home. And I think, look, they're never going to admit it, but they probably hit a run a month ago, like 3 weeks ago. We're probably talking about no one's going to stop them. Like there was pundits elsewhere talking about they won't lose another game all season, and they've lost two now back to back. And I just wondered did they turn the corner from that early start? Did a couple just mentally switch off in that position? And that maybe that trip home from Cork last week with everything that went on, and I mean Stephen Bradley has spoken brilliantly, and it's not really the right word, but very openly and honestly about the sort of the emotions of that. And I'm not trying to be sort of glib, obviously leaving that to the side,
Mm-hmm.
but you can imagine the players generally traveling home from Cork last week on the bus going like, geez, what's happened here? And it might mentally shake them up. And maybe Jerry losing on Saturday has that function
Yeah.
too as well, because that obviously would have been a fear.
Yeah, I think looking at the Rovers, I think are 9 points worse off than they were after 18 games last year. Derry, I mean, I know they're top with the point clearly, haven't exactly taken advantage. And a home game against Shells has kind of tricky 0-0 kind of written all over it in some ways.
Yeah, well, I think the last couple of Shells games definitely backs up the belief it can be tough. As much as I mean, the games last year between these sides were actually pretty tight until the cup final when Derry blitzed them. And Derry just aren't quite in that form. Although, look, we talked a lot about their home form this year. They've probably got a little bit better at home in recent weeks. I think Michael Duffy's directness gives them a different type of option at home, whereas at times it's side to side. Now, it did seem like in Sligo last week they went into that habit a little bit. And striking wise, like they don't have a sort of a trusted goal scorer there with Colin Whelan injured. McGonigal hasn't been in the same form. as he was when he joined the club initially. But you feel like Derry, in a way, they should be stung by what happened too. And heading into like a busy sort of week of like 3 games in 7 days, if they got a Pats on Monday, Derry, they've just got to start this well, and they've got to step up against Shells and show something.
Yeah, speaking of Pats, they're away to UCD again. Going to have the same conversation with UCD. Pat's definitely looking to build on something. That was a huge boost from last week. You were there, obviously quite late, as you remember, but a big boost for them to go on and kick on now in this little period before the break.
Yeah, no, like I mean, the Pats. I mean, they were very good last week in the circumstances. I suppose, like every team that plays UCD away, the feeling is like there's a hangover vibe coming from playing in front of a sort of a jubilant, exuberant sort of Richmond Park, really pumped up against the wall, to suddenly go into a game you're expected to win. And it's just a weird atmosphere. And the thing about Pats is that win last week came at a price, like particularly defensively, they're really threadbare. So they should go and win, but I've no reason to believe it's going to be completely straightforward.
And it's strange, right? The two of the form teams in the league, with Drogheda and Cork City, I think they both have back-to-back wins. That's an interesting game. Cork could look at that if they can win. They close to within 2 points of Drogheda, but Drogheda have been in very good form.
Yeah, it's a really big game. I'm not entirely sure when these sides next meet, but I feel like in the last series of games, that this is going to be a really meaningful game in the context of the playoff race. I still think so. And Cork have got a bit of form, but when I watched it back, I mean, against the 8 men against Rovers, they weren't exactly like a team that knew what to do. Now it's such a unique situation. But like they've still got question marks over the quality of their squad that they're going to strengthen in the summer. Drogheda are probably fearful of losing players. It's a slightly different situation. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, I think probably Drogheda, you could say there's been a bit more consistency around their performance. Cork have managed to get some wins. Well, they were good at home against Sligo Rovers, to be fair to them. But yeah, this is a game of real consequence. And I think, yeah, the next time these sides meet, it'll be a really big game.
Yeah, not that little area under the top four is really starting to tighten up. Sligo have a chance to build on that win against Derry with the away game against Bohs. Bohs have kind of reverted to what people maybe thought they were going to be at the start of the season, which is, the top of the mid half, if you like. It's a difficult one to call this.
Yeah, like Bohs just need to get going again. I mean, they just need to get going. They've, as I said, no wins in 4, and like just that's a stat I just trot out because it just easily comes to mind. Because it's been spoken about, and it easily can become 5 and 6, and it becomes a thing. And they've got a trip to the Derry on the horizon as well, in this sort of series of games. So, like it's tricky. It's tricky because I think Sligo Rovers, we've spoken about, their form generally hasn't been bad. They were probably due a win. They've just been inconsistent. Now again, they had John Matten sent off last week. They're defensively is a concern for them, and I think Bohs, they just need to regain their real persistent attacking threat. They've got James Akintunde back available. They just, it feels like he offers a little bit of variety as a link man sometimes, and that might help them earlier in the season. Like he was important. His movement made space for others. I think other teams are looking, okay, Afolabi is dangerous, but maybe just not scoring. Ali Coote's movement is big, but if you can keep him quiet, maybe you can try and shut down Bohs a little bit. So yeah, it's a big momentum game for them. Sligo Rovers, it feels like maybe a little bit of pressure eased with that win last week, but again, that mid-table is so congested. You feel like you're repeating yourself a lot. Saying it's a big game for both sides. You could say that about every game on Monday and probably every game next Friday as well. And this one is no different.
A few tough ones to call. Right, Dan, thanks very much for that, and we'll chat after the games.